Major breaking news. Donald Trump has announced another historic peace agreement, this time between Israel and Morocco, the fourth Arabic nation to recognize Israel's existence and normalize relations, and the fifth historic peace agreement Donald Trump has secured in the past several months. This is tremendous. And while this story is breaking, another story has been breaking all morning, and since yesterday, actually. Hunter Biden is confirmed to be under criminal investigation pertaining to money laundering and his Chinese business deals. And the scandal isn't just that the incoming president-elect, as the media would have it, is compromised and helped facilitate his son's potentially illegal business dealings. The media covered it all up. Many people said that if they knew about the scandal, they would not have voted for this man. So now we must contend with the fact that as Donald Trump is said to be on the way out, we'll see how this lawsuit goes with Texas and these other states. We have a president who has secured historic peace agreements in North Africa and the Middle East, Arabic nations and Israel, some of the most important peace agreements in the history of this planet. We have this president who is said to be on the way out, and a corrupt, hapless, old crony who helped his son facilitate potentially illegal business dealings, and at the very least, Chinese prominent figures, like the video we saw of Di Dongsheng, bragging that he's compromised. If the media actually covered this, why, you might have peace in the Middle East. But I assure you, if Joe Biden becomes president, and by all accounts, that's where we're headed, we will have nothing but more war. Now, I'm not going to get into all that because we have breaking news to cover, and I'm going to tell you about what's going on with Israel and Morocco. I know for many of you, foreign policy might not be your forte, but this is history in the making. The AP reports Israel and Morocco have agreed to normalize relations. President Donald Trump said Thursday, marking the fourth Arab-Israeli agreement in 4 months. As part of the deal announced near the end of Trump's term, the United States will recognize Morocco's claim over the disputed Western Sahara region. So we'll go into that in a second. Trump said Israel and Morocco would restore diplomatic and other relations, including the immediate reopening of liaison offices in Tel Aviv and Rabat, and the eventual opening of embassies. U.S. officials said there would be joint overflight rights for airlines. The White House said Trump and Morocco's King Mohammed VI had agreed that Morocco would resume diplomatic relations between Morocco and Israel and expand economic and cultural cooperation to advance regional stability. Quote, another historic breakthrough today. Our two great friends, Israel and the Kingdom of Morocco, have agreed to full diplomatic relations, a massive breakthrough for peace in the Middle East. The U.S. will recognize Morocco's claim over Western Sahara, the former Spanish territory in North Africa, where a long-running dispute has confounded international negotiators for decades. Trump noted that Morocco had been the first country to recognize the United States as an independent nation just a year after the U.S. declared its independence from Britain in 1776. It is thus fitting we recognize their sovereignty over the Western Sahara, Trump said. The deal is the result of talks conducted by the president's senior advisor, son-in-law Jared Kushner, and his chief international negotiator, Avi Berkowitz. This is a significant step forward for the people of Israel and Morocco. It further enhances Israel's security while creating opportunities for Morocco and Israel to deepen their economic ties and improve the lives of their people, Kushner said. Morocco is the fourth Arab nation to recognize Israel as the Trump administration seeks to expand a diplomatic framework that began over the summer with an agreement between the Jewish state and the United Arab Emirates. Bahrain and Sudan have followed suit, and administration officials have also been trying to bring Saudi Arabia into the grouping. That would be insane and massive. Saudi Arabia, Israel, wow. What you need to understand about these peace agreements is that many of these Arabic nations did not recognize the existence of Israel. And now they do. And in particular with Sudan, they were in an active war with Israel, ended by Donald Trump. They go on to say, the president reaffirmed his support for Morocco's serious, credible, and realistic autonomy proposal as the only basis for a just and lasting solution to the dispute over the Western Sahara territory. And as such, the president recognized Moroccan sovereignty over the entire Western Sahara territory, the White House said. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on relations between Morocco and Western Sahara, but it is, my understanding in a cursory reading, 80% already controlled by Morocco. Trump is just now saying, we recognize this. They go on to say, All these countries are geographically far removed from the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, making it easier to strike deals with Israel and the U.S. for their own particular interests. Morocco has close ties with Saudi Arabia, which has given it tacit support to the normalization process with Israel, even at a time when peacemaking with the Palestinians is at a standstill. Morocco, a country with centuries of Jewish history, has long been rumored to be ready to establish ties with Israel. Before Israel's establishment in 1948, Morocco was home to a large Jewish population, many of whose ancestors migrated to North Africa from Spain and Portugal during the Spanish Inquisition. Today, hundreds of thousands of Israeli Jews trace their lineage to Morocco, making it one of the country's largest sectors of Israeli society. A small community of Jews, estimated at several thousand people, continues to live in Morocco. Just think about this. There are people in Israel who have their family ancestral history to Morocco, and now relations are normalized. It's probably, not that I think it was impossible, but now they're going to be able to go to Morocco. They're going to be able to go to their, visit their ancestral homes. And I think that's profound and it's amazing. But more importantly, we can talk about culture, tradition, and what matters to people in terms of their lineage. But this means less war. Now, of course, they're saying Morocco is not one of the periphery countries around Israel involved in this conflict, but it's about knocking over the small dominoes, which eventually knock over the big dominoes. You ever see that scientific experiment they do? It's not an experiment, demonstration. We have a little tiny piece of stone or brick, and then it knocks over increasingly larger and larger stones. It's the exponential increase when one knocks over the other. What Trump is doing, I believe we are on track for peace in the Middle East. And that's something people have joked about that we never thought we would see. And we're even closer. Now, I want to talk about what's going on with Western Sahara, but let's read more. They say Morocco has for years had informal ties with Israel. They established low-level diplomatic relations during the 1990s following Israel's interim peace accords with the Palestinians. But those ties were suspended after the outbreak of the second Palestinian uprising in 2000. Since then, the informal ties have continued, and an estimated 50,000 Israelis travel to Morocco each year on trips to learn about their Jewish community and retrace their family history. So like I said, not that it was impossible, but now a lot easier. U.S. backing for Morocco's Western Sahara claim has long been a rumored but unconfirmed bargaining chip in talk about diplomatic ties. Morocco had claimed the vast desert area as its southern provinces since 1975, and the Polisario Front, based in southern Algeria, wants its independence. A recent dust-up with the Polisario brought the issue back into the headlines. So we have this story from Axios giving us greater detail, but I want to stop right here and just look. Many of you may not be, like I mentioned, you may not be particularly interested in foreign policy, but this is something that I pay close attention to because you have a lot of people who talk about the international community. They talk about the refugee crisis. Let me tell you what Trump is doing right now. What Trump has accomplished is a key component in ending the refugee crisis. So if you are someone who thinks the U.S. has an obligation to help refugees, I got one more for you. Helping them where their homes are, where their families are from. Now, I'm not saying refugees are coming from Morocco, but a lot of the conflict we have seen in the Middle East, especially as it pertains to Israel, because there are certain countries that want to destroy Israel. Trump bringing about these peace agreements is a step towards ending the conflict and the war that's created the European refugee crisis, that's created the U.S. refugee crisis. It's not perfect. Trump is not perfect. But if you think, okay, if you care about what's going on with these political issues, this is the most effective thing I think Trump can do. Many on the left have complained that the right is callous towards the plight of these refugees. Let me tell you something. People who live in Europe who are concerned about mass migration have every right to be concerned about it. And you've got to have proper checks and balances to make sure that if you're bringing in refugees, you're doing it in a way that's not putting the refugees at risk. But let's rewind. Why were there so many refugees flooding into Turkey and then into Europe through the Eastern Mediterranean route? Because of what Barack Obama did in Syria, arming rebel groups, which eventually led to the rise of ISIS, destabilizing the country, destroying cities like Aleppo, and forcing millions to flee. Then, where could they go? Now, there was always a question about the refugees and why they were choosing to go to Europe instead of places, say, like Lebanon. Well, it's because European countries started offering up benefits and very liberal policies that was just better for them. But I actually interviewed a refugee from Syria who said it's actually problematic because they have these promises of homes and access to public resources. but they don't properly, they don't speak the language, so it's much harder for them to get work. All of these problems are related to each other. A large portion of Donald Trump's campaigning, of the Muslim ban, things like this, were the result of Barack Obama and George W. Bush's foreign policy, which created chaos and caused people in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria to flee, among other countries and territories. Now, again, Morocco is not Syria. Morocco is not Israel. It's not Iraq. But like I said, Trump is knocking down the small dominoes, which is leading to the larger that are going to fall. Think about it this way. We'd love to see more nations in the Middle East recognize the existence of Israel. Well, once all of the smaller ones do, then there's more pressure on the larger nations to do this. My friends, peace in the Middle East is something we absolutely need to strive for. Now, you may have heard me just mention the product of Barack Obama's foreign policy. I'd like to ask you all a question as to who was vice president when that foreign policy was being implemented and who oversaw U.S. action in Iraq. Joe Biden. That's right. When the refugee crisis was exploding, it was from Joe Biden overseeing Iraq. I went to Europe. I went to these refugee camps. I talked to some of these people. Many of them came from Iraq because of the devastation. Now, I blame first and foremost George W. Bush and the mainstream media because they lied. And now you know exactly what it is they want and why they don't like Donald Trump. Because Donald Trump has been pulling our troops out, or at least trying to, being lied to and obstructed by the establishment politicians. Donald Trump has not started new wars, the first president in, I think, 4 decades. In fact, he's bringing about peace in the Middle East. Come to me, complain about everything else he's done, and I will say, so what? And I mean it. I mean it. Let me tell you something. Normalized relations with Israel. Now, there's many people complaining about the Western Sahara issue. Okay. But let me tell you something. You don't get to come to me and talk about all of the things the American people, the left says, but what about our social issues? What about the policies Trump will bring about? First and foremost, half the country likes the policies Trump will bring about. So if you want to have some kind of adjudication between the two factions and what they principally care about, by all means, we'll have that discussion. But if you come to tell me and say, the one thing we're guaranteed is that Trump will do right by the countries that were the most negatively impacted due to American foreign policy, then I'm going to be like, I'm sorry, I don't care about your negotiations here. I am someone who cares about foreign policy. I care about the international humanitarian crisis that has been affecting North Africa, the Middle East, and Europe for years now as a result of George W. Bush, followed by Barack Obama. See, it was Barack Obama who got us entangled in Libya and Syria. That wasn't George W. Bush. George W. got us in Afghanistan and Iraq. The machine loves the war. They love the conflict, and they hate Trump because of it. Not only has Trump not started wars, he's ending them. He ended the Sudan war. So again, people say to me that Trump is bad for this reason, Trump is bad for that reason. And they tend to be first and foremost character issues that, I'm sorry, don't have that big of an impact on me. Or there tend to be policy debates about American domestic policy. Me, I'm concerned about the kids being blown up overseas. I'm concerned about Donald Trump and his drone strikes. Now, he upped them. He didn't start new wars, but he certainly upped drone strikes, something that, he needs to be criticized for. He fired missiles into Syria. And then in the past few years, he started making a difference. Now, maybe this is some kind of trick. That's what the left would say. Trump is only pretending to care about the stuff to try and get some support to somehow steal the election order. I don't care, man. I don't want a Joe Biden presidency. Hunter Biden is compromised. In turn, Joe Biden flew his son to China for these deals, for which he is now under criminal investigation. The media lied about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and they lied and covered up the scandal of Joe Biden because Joe Biden is compromised. All right? That's my rant on this. But let's talk about any potential downsides. This is what they say over at Axios. They mentioned that Morocco is the 4th Arab country to move toward normalization with Israel. They're literally normalizing relations, not moving towards it. They say, the other side, while the normalization deal is a win for Israel and a significant achievement for Trump, recognition of Western Sahara as part of Morocco is a big shift in U.S. policy and a major diplomatic achievement for Morocco. I think this is good news for everybody. Western Sahara is sparsely populated, disputed territory that borders Morocco on the northwest corner of Africa. It was formerly controlled by Spain and is now claimed by Morocco despite international opposition and fierce resistance from the indigenous population. This is potentially bad. They say a violent insurgency ended in 1991 after 16 years, but the matter remains unresolved. Several weeks ago, fighting erupted again between the Moroccan army and Sahrawi rebels. They say the U.S. is now the only Western country to recognize Moroccan sovereignty over Western Sahara. President-elect Joe Biden will have to decide whether to reverse Trump's decision after taking office in January. Such a move would not be easy for Biden to make because it could cause the Morocco-Israeli normalization process to collapse, and that would be, in my opinion, substantially worse. Kushner said in a briefing with reporters that Morocco had agreed to resume official contacts with Israel, allow Israeli airlines to use Moroccan airspace, and begin direct flights between the countries. Kushner said Morocco and Israel would promote deeper business ties, so we understand all this. They're going to say that Morocco and Israel have had a secret relationship dating back to the 60s, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, one of the biggest criticisms we've seen from the anti-war left and progressives over Trump's agreements is that, you know, Bahrain and the Emirates and Morocco, they've all secretly been in support of Israel as it is. It's just a formality. It's just not real. It's public perception that changes the minds of people. Donald Trump crossed through the demilitarized zone into North Korea. And then I got to hear all about how it was stupid, it was dangerous, Trump was giving in to despots. No, they're wrong. Donald Trump, with no security, entered a hostile nation, a sign of trust, an important sign of trust. Trump saying, I don't think I will be hurt if I do this. Could you imagine that? I want you to imagine being told you can't go to a country. There's no diplomatic ties. When I went to Israel, I was told if they stamp your passport with an Israeli stamp, you can't go to these other countries, these Muslim nations, because they don't view Israel as legitimate. So Israel gave me a card to put in my passport instead of a stamp, because Israel knows it's a detriment. It hurts people's ability to travel between these countries. Imagine being told that, and now being told that you can freely move about. There was, I think it was in the Emirates, there's a viral video of a Jewish wedding. This is incredible stuff. Look, Christianity and Judaism have been heavily reformed over the years, and they get along quite fine. In the West, much of Islam has also been as well, but not perfectly. There's still a conflict between Islam and Judaism, notably with territories pertaining to Israel and these Arabic nations. I want peace, man. I don't want fighting. I don't want war. And that's why I don't like Joe Biden. It's why I didn't like Barack Obama, because he promised me he would end these wars, and he didn't do it. Trump did promise he would end the forever wars, that's for sure. But he wasn't doing it in the first few years, and things started to change. Over the past year or so, Trump has slowly started bringing about actual peace. Now, look, Western Sahara, as you can see here, they have a disputed line, and it looks like Morocco, for the most part, seeks to control it. And that's what the U.S. is now recognizing. I understand that there are serious problems if the indigenous population is not going to accept this. That is bad. And I want to make sure their rights are protected as well. This is tough. Diplomacy is never easy. And I hope this doesn't result in more serious problems. But I'm also hoping that Morocco's recognition formally and publicly will pressure other countries, other states to get involved in recognizing Israel. And then we can finally do away with this long-standing conflict. It's really funny to me because people often bring up Palestine and Israel resolution as one of the most difficult foreign policy or international relations disputes we have right now in this country. We now have a chance to bring it to an end. But you know what? The media lied to get us involved in the war. Trump has been trying to withdraw our troops, so I'm not surprised the media lied again to protect Joe Biden, who is crooked, corrupt, and helped enrich his son off of his name and office, who got his brother. Do you know this? Joe Biden's brother made millions building housing in Iraq, who oversaw Iraq and helped get these contracts. Why? It was none other than Joe Biden. And that's from Politico Magazine's Biden Inc. I don't know what's going to happen, but I know that there's a lot of people who refuse to accept a Joe Biden presidency. And it's for these reasons and more. His son is under a criminal investigation, and the media covered it up, and big tech covered it up. Why? These people want war. They like war. They like conflict. They want us fighting. They don't want unity. It's funny that they say that, these people are the globalists or whatever. and that Trump is the nationalist. But Trump is doing more to bring about world peace than these people have ever done. Barack Obama is not solely responsible for, but a large contributing factor and bears much responsibility for the rise of ISIS. And Trump bears responsibility for ending ISIS. What is wrong with these people? Trump can say all the naughty words in the world and he can be an awful person, but I will take these peace agreements. All right, look, I think a lot of people don't care all that much about foreign policy, but this is breaking news. This is history, and I'm going to cover it. I'm not going to ignore it. There's a bunch of other stories I could cover that probably would get more traction, but please recognize how significant this is. And we'll see how these lawsuits play out. I'd love to see 4 more years of this kind of foreign policy bringing about peace in the Middle East. I understand there's potential for conflict in Western Sahara. There's always been, though. Morocco recognizing Israel and vice versa just means we are that much closer to peace. Next segment's coming up at my main channel, youtube.com/Timcast. Check it out. I know many people think it's this. No. Hold, let me stop you there. Go to the address bar, type in youtube.com/Timcast. And when you press enter, you'll go to a different channel where at 4 p.m. I will have the video up. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all then.